in the 2012 movie Jack Reacher, One Shot, starring Tom Cruise. Now, the origin story of Jack Reacher has been much told, and it's a good one. Creator Lee Child lost his television production job in England, and at 40, tried his hand at writing a thriller. It was called The Killing Floor, 1997. Lee Child has written one every year since. His 23rd is just out. It's called Past Tense. They are insanely popular. All feature Reacher, the knight-errant dealing to villains in a forensically violent fashion. Among Lee Child's many awards is the Ringer Award for the character who's been put through it all. Lee Child is coming to New Zealand soon. He is on the line from New York, I think. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. I should say good morning, I guess. It's just after 6 here in New York, just going dark, but it's already Saturday, and I love that in New Zealand because it means that we know tomorrow is coming.
Yeah, and
okay.
I can tell you that tomorrow is going to be fine.
Great.
We played that track from one of the Jack Reacher movies so that we could deal with the issue of Tom Cruise. Because you've spent years saying, oh, Tom may be small, but he has the spirit of a lion, and, you know, Reacher's size is just a metaphor and such things. Can we now agree that Tom Cruise is to Jack Reacher what Thumbelina is to the Hulk?
Well, you know, I loved working with the guy. He was such a nice guy.
Yes.
He's a really, really nice guy.
Oh, whatever.
He has a nice, great instinct for story, but yeah. In New Zealand, do you do feet and inches or do you do meters now?
Well, depends how old you are.
In meters,
technically, we do meters.
Yeah, but, you know, whatever, he's still
tiny.
Reacher's size, and in a way, I never really thought that it would bother people that much.
Oh, but how could you not have? Reacher, you talk about the size of Jack Reacher. Reacher is the size...
Yeah, I know.
He's the size of a fridge freezer. He has hands the size of supermarket chickens.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
All that is true, but you know that because you've read the book, and I was sort of taken by surprise that people wanted an exact facsimile of the book rather than...
no, that's not true. No, be fair. Be fair.
Okay,
people
be fair.
did not want an exact facsimile. They just wanted somebody with a bit of heft.
Yeah, they wanted the feel and the vibe of Reacher, and they did not get it. And so we accept that, and we have done something about it. So it's all good. We are, in fact, what is it today? Friday for me, Saturday for you. So on Wednesday afternoon, about 48 hours ago, we finally did a deal that will take it away from the movies because the movie business is weird at the moment. There's just no enthusiasm for those middle-sized movies. You know, what the Reacher movies were a straightforward 2-hour narrative movie with a beginning, a middle, and an end and stuff going on and things to be sorted out. And there doesn't seem to be room for that in the marketplace anymore. Everything is either a tiny little quirky independent or it is a monster cartoon character thing basically made for China. And so the normal stuff like Reacher is getting squeezed out of the middle, and it's all going to television because now we have Netflix and so on, Amazon, who do these long binge-watching series, 10 or 12 episodes per season. And way back when we did this current Tom Cruise deal, that was a long time ago now, and that kind of television didn't exist. And in the decade or so, in fact, it's 13 years since we did that original deal, and of course things have changed a lot. And so happily, for some bizarre reason, in the contract was a clause that said if I wasn't happy after 2 movies, I could move on to something else. And I'm glad that clause was in there because it's enabled us now to pick up on the future, which is we're going to go to one of the streaming services.
Which one?
Well, we don't know. We're in the happy situation of both of them want it. And so, they're going to have to fight it out amongst themselves and see who wins. And
But nothing's been made yet.
No, like I said, the deal's only 48 hours old. So,
Right.
And I'm meeting with some people on Monday, and then we're going to start thrashing it out. But television is a lot quicker than movies, so whatever we do, we're going to see a result much faster than if we were making a third movie. So,
And what do you have in mind? You're going to have in mind a series incorporating many of the books, or you're going to choose one or two books?
Well, I think the way it will probably inevitably work, if you look at how it works for other people, is altogether there is 23 books this year, as you said. Past tense is the 23rd book. And then next year will be the 24th. So let's keep it in round numbers, 24. If they were to do like 8 seasons, that could be 3 books per season. And what they would do, I think, is pick a main book for that season and then throw in the good parts from the spare 2 just to beef it up. And I think that could work really, really well. But, of course, the main thing is that, as you pointed out quite rightly, readers were upset about Tom Cruise not matching up to Reacher. And so what we want to happen is the readers to have some kind of ownership in this thing, that if we are going to go to this new format with a new actor, then I think the readers should be involved in terms of saying who they want, who they think would be good.
Oh, you're so
I
democratic.
think that would be great.
Yeah.
People would realize, yes, okay, things are changing now for the better, and we have an input. I think that would be fabulous.
Okay, well, somebody's already suggested Timothy Oliphant to us. I don't know Timothy Oliphant.
I'm not sure I do either. I mean, there are lots and lots of suggestions. And, of course, the other thing we could look for is a completely unknown guy.
Yeah.
Because that also is an advantage of television now, whereas movies are incredibly star-driven. That's the first thing you got to get is the star. And he really then powers the whole thing. Or she, if it's a woman's movie, they control the whole thing. Everything's built around them. They are essentially the product. But with television now, that doesn't really matter so much. So we could get somebody completely unknown. And, there's got to be actors out there who need the break and who are exactly physically right.
You wouldn't fancy doing it yourself. You are very tall.
I am, but I am also very old. And it was...
Well, how old's Reacher?
You were playing that song, Young Americans, and I'm thinking... that's fine, except I'm no longer young.
How old's Reacher?
Reacher is, that's a mystery to me, how old Reacher is, because at the beginning, what I wanted to do, obviously, he started out in Killing Floor. He was 36 years old, and that was a kind of private wink towards Dick Francis. Have you ever read him, Dick Francis?
Yeah.
He writes about horse racing mysteries, or he did, because he passed away, sadly, but his main character was always 36. Usually an ex-jump jockey and now with some kind of security role, 36 years old. And so as a nod towards Dick Francis, I made Reacher 36 in the first book, which you kind of got to do because you can't start him off age 5. You can't have Jack Reacher, boy detective. So he had to be a grown-up at the beginning. And then the thing is, of course, he gets older. But some of the books were prequels, and some of the books take place back-to-back within days. And so he's not necessarily 23 years older than that now. I think he's probably, maybe late 40s, maybe around about 50 or early 50s, which is still a pretty good age. I felt great when I was that age. It's much later that I've fallen apart, but it's, he can keep going up to around about 55, I should think.
Yeah, but given the diet, it's remarkable that he's in such good nick.
Yeah, but that's the magic of fiction, Nothing ever goes wrong with the guy. He eats terribly. He quit smoking, of course, years ago. That's mentioned in one of the books. But he eats terribly. His arteries must be completely furred up. But he keeps on trucking.
I'll give you a couple of 3 names that are coming through. We have Hugh Jackman. Yeah. We have Liam Neeson. We have Tom Hardy.
Right.
Yes.
He's Australian, and he is...
I know there is that. Can't be doing that.
There is that. And also, he did a thing on Broadway here where he was singing and dancing, which good luck to him. That's
No, can't be having that either.
The Boy from Oz, it was called. It was like a musical show. And
No.
I was thinking, really? Is that really the Reacher image?
No.
So I'm not too sure about Hugh. Also, Hugh he's a lovely guy. I once flew to London with him from New York, and we were sitting next to each other. And he's a lovely guy. But he's not all that huge, He's smaller than I am.
Somebody says Chris Hemsworth, but I think Chris Hemsworth's too pretty.
Yeah, you see, that's the other thing, which makes it difficult with actors, because I regard Reacher as, he's not ugly. You wouldn't run away in horror, but he's not conventionally good-looking.
No.
He's a bit of a bruiser. And
He's got a face like, what do you describe his face like in your latest one? It's a huge, fat...
There's a lot of descriptions over the years. One of them, like somebody carved him out of stone, but not taken enough time, or something like that.
Yes.
He's a bit unfinished looking. And actors tend to be very good looking, and that's a slight problem. Liam Neeson would be interesting, although I think he's a little old, and he's also done that Taken franchise.
Yeah.
Which is kind of similar, or, at least in the same ballpark. So I'm thinking... There are lots of identifiable people, but wouldn't it be great to find some person who, has been struggling as a B actor or something for years?
Yep, and launch them.
This is the guy.
No.
In the same way that it used to happen way back in time. Do you remember the very early James Bonds with Sean Connery? Well, of course, Sean Connery now, iconic, everybody's favorite James Bond, except that he was completely unknown at the time. That was a pick of a complete unknown. And it would be kind of cool to do that over again.
What the movie never was able to do is what your movies, plural, is what your books are distinguished by, which is the action scenes, the slow kind of breaking down of violence into its micro moments. And you could go slow-mo, I suppose, but it just wouldn't work. You can't replicate that on the movies, can you?
You can't really. I mean, there was a Sherlock Holmes movie I remember a few years ago. I can't remember who was it who played Sherlock Holmes, but I can't remember. But it was
not Benedict Cumberbatch or Robert Downey Jr.
Not that one. It was a movie, and it was
Robert Downey Jr.
Exactly. I want to say Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law played Watson, and that had elements of Sherlock Holmes would get into a confrontation and. They sort of diagrammed it on the movie screen. He could do this, he could do that. It looked like a geometric or mathematical calculation as things ran through Sherlock Holmes's head. And I'm pretty sure they stole that from the Reacher books, as you say, that thinking ahead of time. And that's a way that they could go. But, that's really up to them. I'm very careful never to interfere too much in these things because it doesn't work. If somebody's looking over your shoulder, you don't do your best work. So what I usually say to them is, this is your show. You do what you need to do, and I'm not going to criticize it. And so hopefully they'll work out a way to get better value out of the fights because the fights themselves are over real quick. And so in the books, what I try and do is to say he could do A, he could do B, he could do C, but actually he did D. And that gives you kind of 4 times the value.
Yes, because his brain works like that on various levels. Some have called it violence pornographied. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that actually it's a very sophisticated response that's coming from the audience because book readers as a whole are the most thoughtful, the most civilized, the most educated and aware people because they're reading books. They're expanding their horizons. So they are pretty good citizens, mostly book readers. And in real life, they know, of course, they should not have all this stuff. Of course, this should not happen. If you get a bad guy, then of course you should arrest him, and you should put him in the system, and there should be a fair trial with protections for the accused and all that kind of good stuff, and rules of evidence and all proper procedure. People know that in the forefront of their brain, and they approve of it, and they want it, and they wouldn't want it any other way. But that is terribly frustrating in real life, where you know that here's a guy, a bad guy, guilty, totally guilty, really bad guy. They're frustrated that he gets all the chances of technicalities and getting out of it for some other reason. And it's frustrating, and it's rather boring, and it's rather miserable. So I think people turn to it in books, in fiction. They turn to the summary justice, the violent justice, as a kind of consolation for how dull real life is, how correct real life is. They love to see that happen on the page.
I mean, he's a vigilante. He's got the morality of a vigilante.
Yeah, but with a heart of gold, and I think people respond in a very sophisticated way. They sort of say to themselves, yes, we know we shouldn't have this in real life, but we're going to love it on the page because it is just consoling. It's just fabulous. You know, we've all been in situations where we just want to give somebody a smack on the head.
You will not be surprised at the number of suggestions that are coming in about who would play Jack Reacher on your forthcoming television series. Clive Owen, Vince Vaughn, I say no. We have a number of All Blacks who have been suggested. Rufus Sewell, again, too small. Mickey Rourke, no. Hugo Weaving, Australian again, can't be doing that. Dwayne Johnson, cliche. Liev Schreiber. Sorry, I'm ruling all of these out on your behalf, I think.
Well, Dwayne Johnson really, I think, wanted to do it some time ago.
Did he?
And yeah, I'm not sure that he would now because, you know, his career has gone in various different directions. But what you said about the All Blacks, I mean, that is great. That's because that, to me, is how I picture Reacher. There was 20-some years ago when I was starting the series, there was an English rugby player called Lawrence Dallaglio, who rugby people probably remember. And he was, I would never say this to his face because he's about 8 feet tall, but he was an ugly sort of guy. And he was the sort of guy that, I mean, I think he was actually very civilized. I think he was a lawyer in real life or whatever, but he looked like a real thug. And if he walked into a room, you would just get a little chill. And that is what I want. And you find that not so much in actors, but in athletes. You know, a lock forward, a second row forward, or something like that, a big, ugly character. That is the look that I want for him, because that's what he looks like to me.
It's interesting, the sense that people get from Jack Reacher. My theory is that men want to be him, and women want to be his very close companion.
I used to think that, and that was the way the series was promoted for a while. And I think it's basically true, but there is a large subset of women who want to be him as well. I started out thinking this whole footloose, uncommitted, lack of responsibility thing was a male fantasy, that men, you know, burdened down with the bills and the mortgage and all that kind of stuff, would just love to be somewhere else tomorrow with nothing to do, nothing on their back. And I think that's largely true for men, but I've learned over the years it's true for women too. Women would just love to walk away and be somewhere else tomorrow.
It's quite an interesting fantasy, isn't it? Because he's got no job.
Nothing to burden you down, no chores, nothing to do, complete freedom. It's actually quite hard work, because I've tried to, you know, sometimes I do that. I just drift around and go from place to place just for the fun of it. And it's tiring. It's hard work. If you don't have a home base, people don't really think about that in advance. It wears you out, but it is absolutely, you got nothing to worry about.
Well, I imagine at this stage in your life you wouldn't actually be living from hand to mouth, but most of us, you know, would need to earn a crust. Jack Reacher, of course, I guess, has his military pension, doesn't he?
Yeah, he has a military pension, but, you know, what he does basically is spoils of war. If he's up against some bad guys and he wins, which of course he will, then he will take what they've got. It's like an ancient system, you know, the spoils of war. To the victor go the spoils, and so he will take their money or whatever, and he'll live off that for a little while.
Yeah, although
there was a gigantic scam where he paid everybody back, everybody was made whole, but there was some left over, and so I think he's got a substantial amount of money in the bank. But he's not interested in it. As long as he's got enough to get a bus ticket and a meal in a diner, that's all he needs.
Yeah. Because in your latest one, he doesn't take the money.
he doesn't. He lets somebody else have it, and because I think he would take a share if he wanted it, but he just doesn't. He's one of those guys that is oblivious. It's irrelevant to him. As long as he's got enough for today, he doesn't care.
Most heroes tend to be anti-heroes in this kind of genre, and we worry about them, you know. Oh, they're drinking too much, and they shouldn't be smoking so much. And their ex-wife is, you know, not working out in terms of amicability, or their ex-husband.
Their daughter hates them and all that.
Aye. Yeah. And we're concerned, and are they going to make it? And are they going to... Jack Reacher is invincible. There is no anxiety. I have no anxiety about him whatsoever. He will survive. He's going to be fine. His heart's not going to be broken. And he doesn't drink and he doesn't smoke.
Yeah. So he's got, he doesn't have those problems. And I agree with you that way back when that was introduced as a new concept, the suffering hero.
The flawed hero.
The flaws, the possibly recovering alcoholic type of thing. And you can probably date that back to a writer called James Lee Burke, who invented Dave Robichaux.
Yeah.
And that was brilliant, because the first time anything is done is brilliant. The first time is great, but then the second time gets boring and the third time gets worse. And there's a kind of inflation built in that if one guy is miserable, the next guy has got to be super miserable. And if one guy has a drinking problem, the next guy's got to have a terrible drinking problem, and so on. And over the years, it builds up to a ludicrous degree. And what I wanted to do with Reacher was to skip backwards, before all that started, and just have a regular, normal hero. Which sounds like it should be boring, because unless there is a flaw or something like that, the character is regarded as bland. But the point about Reacher is he does have problems, but he doesn't know that he's got these problems, and therefore he's not constantly gazing at his navel, and he's not constantly moaning and whining. He thinks he's normal. He thinks he's fine. It's the rest of us see that he's a bit odd, especially with the loneliness thing. Because I think, personally, that's the key issue in Reacher's emotional makeup, that he loves solitude, but he worries about being lonely. It's a circle that he cannot square, especially because his lifestyle is so eccentric that the kind of women that he falls for, smart, intelligent women, they won't put up with it. They think, oh, this guy is great for 24 hours or 48 hours. This is just bliss. But after that, forget it. There's no future with this guy. So he gets rejected quite a lot. And I think that does upset him. He's worried about being lonely.
Brendan Gleeson.
Mm-hmm.
He's desperately attractive in a peculiar kind of way, but he'd have to tone up a bit, shall we say.
Yeah, to go back to Vince Vaughn that you mentioned.
No, not Vince Vaughn.
Vince Vaughn's very tall, but he's a bit sort of flabby.
Flabby is the word we're looking for.
Soft, don't you think? And
Yeah.
Soft,
No.
You get the feeling if you touch Reacher, it's like touching an oak tree.
Yeah.
And you don't get that impression out of certain people.
You've given all your manuscripts, all your papers, your letters and your notes and your manuscripts to the British Archive for Contemporary Writing at the University of East Anglia. That sounds terribly respectable.
Absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, they asked me, and I thought they were kidding. I mean, why would anybody be interested in my stuff? But they have a huge writer thing there. It's really the writers' university, and they teach crime fiction there, and there's a lot of good stuff going on. And so I thought, well, great, it can stop cluttering up my back room. It can clutter up their back room.
It'll leave a space in your study, judging by the quantity, I imagine.
Now. And they have it all. It's very interesting at the moment, though, that kind of stuff, because, of course, in my career, because of when it started, really totally spans the electronic age. That in the beginning, everything was on paper, literally everything, paper manuscripts, paper notes, letters from my editor, all that stuff was paper. And so the early books are totally represented. The later books, of course, everything is now digital. I never see paper. I write on a computer, I email the manuscript. The production stuff is all done electronically. There's no paper until the book is finally published. So the archive is a little bit thin in the newer end as opposed to the older end.
When you get letters from readers, do any of them say, look, Jack Reacher in the first book did this and this isn't consistent with that? Are they train spotters?
There's every kind of reader, and absolutely, yeah, there are readers like that. And but the way to get around that is just to ask them. There was one particular woman who was a retired school teacher, and she knew everything, and she could point out all the inconsistencies in the timeline and so on. And so I just said, look, you can be the archivist. If I have a question, I'm going to email you, and you tell me. So I do that. Where was Reacher in whatever year? What was he doing? And she'll tell me. And that avoids future mistakes. The most letters you get are when the story kind of impinges upon somebody's area of professional expertise. Helicopter pilots they love to write, because most times you dramatize it. You make the helicopter crash really, really spectacular. It comes tumbling down from the sky 1,000 feet and so on, because that's what you want to do for a thriller plot. But then the helicopter drivers all write in and say, oh, no, that's not what happens. It does it completely differently, and it just sort of sinks down in a boring fashion. And I feel like saying, yeah, I understand that in reality, but I can't put boring stuff in my book.
You are refreshingly unliterary in that, let the readers decide who they want to play Jack Reacher, and let readers tell me this and that, and one of the reasons I understand that you set your latest book in New England is because there are commercial reasons, presumably, but there are a lot of readers of you in New England. Is that correct?
Yeah, there were, we did some research and tried to find the hot spots where the most books were sold per person. And, the Portland, Maine was very high, and New Hampshire was very high. That whole New England section was very high. Seattle on the West Coast, various other places. So I just thought, yeah, why not? If that's where the readers are, I'll tell them a story about their own place.
But it's not sufficiently detailed for them to say, excuse me, but the road doesn't go left there.
It's not, because you've got to avoid that, or else you just got to take it on the chin, which sometimes I do. I call it getting it wrong in order to get it right, because, of course, if you live in a particular place, you're going to know that, that street is one way, and there's no left turn there, and all that kind of stuff. But the rest of the world doesn't care about that. The rest of the world just wants a good story. So I often just fudge it completely in order just to make it slicker and more coherent. For instance, one of the books was set in Texas, and I wanted to use the state troopers, which is a well-known concept in the U.S. and also around the world, the idea of the state police, highway patrol and all that kind of thing. Everybody knows that. So I called the Texas State Police, and they were doing this and that. And in reality, that department in Texas is named the Department of Public Safety. They're not called the state police. They're called the Department of Public Safety. And I didn't call them that because what does that mean to the rest of the world? In New Zealand, you read about the Department of Public Safety. What is that? You think what are they, restaurant inspectors or something? So it's better to use a word like state police or highway patrol that everybody understands around the world, even though it's wrong for that particular location. And therefore, people will write to you and say, no, it's not called that. And I kind of think, I know that, but the rest of the world doesn't know that.
I'm talking to the author known as Lee Child. What does your wife call you, though?
Well, I'm lucky if she calls me anything. Usually Oi.
Not Jim?
Like that. Yeah, Jim is my real name, and she and my brother and just one or two old friends. It's probably less than a handful of people call me Jim, because almost everybody now, after 20-plus years that I know, is connected with the book world, and so to them, I'm Lee.
And why Lee Child?
It was Well, I'll tell you one thing, that in any writer's household, there are constant word games. It's how you can tell if a writer lives there. So what happened years and years ago, this was ages ago, like 40 years ago or more, we were in New York staying with Jane's parents, who lived just north of the city outside. And we'd been to see a Broadway show, and we were coming back on the last train, which was very crowded, so we weren't sitting together, we were just sitting in random seats. And I was next to this guy who started talking to me. And as soon as I replied, obviously he noticed that I had a foreign accent from Britain. And so, apropos of absolutely nothing, he said to me, "I have a European car." And I said, "Oh, really? Do you? What car is
What a
that?"
coincidence.
And back then in the 1970s, Renault of France sold cars in the U.S. They no longer do, but they did back then. And the little hatchback, the little compact car in Britain and France and everywhere else was called the Renault 5. But in America, they marketed it as Le Car in order to make it sound kind of chic and Parisian. And so I said to this guy, what car have you got? And he said, "I've got Lee car." And so, immediately Lee became the word for the, Every definite article became Lee. It was Lee this and Lee that in our house. And then when our daughter was born, she was Lee baby. And then when she grew up a little bit, she was Lee child. And so when I wanted to pick a new name, I thought, that's a sweet name. It's a nice sentimental association for my family. And it also is easy to hear and easy to remember and easy to repeat. And for a lot of people, in fact, most people, child has a warm association.
Yeah.
And so it was a gift in the sense of this guy's mispronunciation just cracked us up. But it was also a pretty useful name, I thought.
I think on the basis that you have a lot of readers in New England, and thus you had set your new book, Past Tense, in New England, somebody has texted to say, "My son in Lower Hutt has most of Jack Reacher books. Could Mr. Child set his next book in New Zealand?"
Well, I should, because New Zealand is fantastic for me. New Zealand has always been the world capital of Reacher madness. It was the first place that it really took off.
Really?
And, yeah, it really
I did not
was.
know that.
Yeah, it was the first place that it went huge, and it still is in a lot of ways per capita one of my best sales ever. I mean, I do great in New Zealand. The problem is there aren't enough people in New Zealand. I wish there were 100 million, and then if I had the same per capita rate, it would be fantastic. I mean, literally, it would be unbelievable to scale up my New Zealand sale to the size of the U.S. population, for instance. I mean, it's an unbelievable quantity. I can't imagine. I think everybody in New Zealand must buy the book and all the sheep as well.
So you would not dare to set a Jack Reacher book? I mean, you set them in Europe, but not outside Europe in the U.S.
I would, absolutely. But, I don't make a plan. I don't really have an outline in mind when I start a book. So there would have to be some reason why he went there, or some involvement that took him there. And I can sort of, in a way, you could have a kind of social thing. Let's say he's hanging out in a bar somewhere in America, let's say somewhere near a big city, and he meets an airline flight attendant in the bar, and they kind of hook up and have a nice time, and she says, "Well, look, I can get you on this flight free, you can go to New Zealand." And he thinks, well, great, I'd like to see that country. So maybe he would go there, and then he'd get involved in something. But it has to just occur to me. I can't plan it. I'm a hopeless planner. I don't like to plan a book because it puts it into a kind of straitjacket that maybe you would be better off going in a different direction, but you kind of can't, because you've made this big plan and you don't want to abandon it.
I find it, is this true that you start writing with no idea then what's going to happen?
No idea whatsoever, not even for the next page, not even for the next paragraph. It's just like real life, let's see what happens next.
I can't imagine how you'd have a sufficiently rich imagination to, because you religiously write a book every year. Do you always know there's going to be a new way to go?
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking because it's a high-wire act. You know, you got no safety net, you got no notes, you got no idea, you got nothing jotted down. So it is a total, you hold your breath and hope for the best. And the only way I can do it is to say to myself, well, hey, look, it's worked more than 20 times before, so it'll work again. And usually it does. And I think the story's better for it because it just flows, it goes organically, things happen when they need to happen. I do honestly feel that a plan is a straitjacket, although lots of other writers, virtually every other writer does a big outline or something like that. And obviously those books are fine, they're great, so it works different ways for different people. It's a classic situation. You ask 10 writers for advice, you're going to get 20 different opinions.
When you have, oodles of money and leisure and servants, do you have a team of researchers who at least fact-check your books or go to the places or what?
I don't. You're right in as much as I've been very, very lucky to have the success that I've had. There's no question about that. I'm very lucky. I'm very grateful about it. And I certainly have got more money than I used to have, but I don't feel like a rich guy. I feel like a poor guy who has a lot of money. And there's a crucial difference there because I'm not instinctively the sort of person that would employ a servant or a help or anything like that. I just don't do that. And so for the research, no, I wouldn't want to share control. I wouldn't want to share responsibility. And also because I write it, I make it up as I go along. It's spontaneous. I can't afford to stop and wait for somebody to give me the answer. If I don't know the answer, then I'll find another way around it.
Viggo Mortensen, Sam Neill.
Viggo, yeah. Although he's a smallish guy, but I was very impressed with him. I don't know if you remember, and you should, because it was filmed there. The first Lord of the Rings, that the first of the three. There's a scene where Viggo is sitting in a bar, and all the hobbits come into the bar, and Viggo is so still and silent and somehow menacing that I thought, that was a really good Reacher moment. He was surrounded by a bubble of silence in a kind of no-go area, and I thought, that is Reacher, except again, Viggo is not huge.
Did you see him in History of Violence, I think?
I did. I was just thinking about that movie the other day.
It's a good movie.
For some bizarre reason, I got 2 copies of it on DVD, and I was trying to remember why. And, the History of Violence, I thought was a terrific movie from that point of view.
Yeah.
But again, we've once bitten, twice shy. I feel we've really got to go for somebody who is physically Reacher's size.
I know. Somebody suggested Timothy Spall, but that's got to be a little joke, with all due respect.
That might be a nod to my Birmingham roots, because Tim is a Brummie and he has a fabulous Brummie accent and all of that stuff. But I think he is not exactly Jack Reacher.
What about Sam Neill? Sam Neill could do it.
Yeah, it's going to be real fun. Lots of people could do it, and it's going to be fun to see who the readers instinctively feel is the right guy. I'll tell you what, I'll be very cross if they all pick somebody who's not all that much bigger than Cruise. I'm going to say, what were you complaining?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. The reason I asked about a team of researchers is that, I don't know, did you start off knowing an awful lot about the trajectory of fists and the workings of guns?
To a certain extent, yeah. I'm fascinated by how things work, machines and processes, how things work. So I did know a lot of it. I know a tremendous amount of trivia. I know nothing of any value whatsoever, but I know a lot of trivial stuff. And there are people that volunteer to help. And I found that it's kind of contradictory because a lot of people in the military or in law enforcement in particular love the Reacher books. And then they retire and then they write to the website and say, I'm a retired FBI guy. I love your books. If you ever want any advice or information, just give me a call. And what I found over the years is that you cannot make this stuff up. Whatever you ask is happening somewhere.
Yes.
Whatever you dream up is happening somewhere. There was one example in the book called A Wanted Man, where I had the idea that suppose the FBI was doing some kind of sting operation and an innocent member of the public blundered into the middle of it. They would obviously have to be removed for their own safety and so as not to blow the operation. So they're removed, and I thought maybe they're kind of sequestered somewhere. And I imagined this lonely motel that the FBI bought and refurbished and built a fence around, and that became kind of involuntary witness protection for a couple of weeks for somebody who blundered into the wrong thing. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, is this too ludicrous? So I did actually call up one of these retired FBI guys, and I said, you know, this is my idea that the FBI has bought this motel and put a fence around it, and it's like involuntary witness protection. Is that too stupid? And the guy said, how did you hear about that?
There are a couple of facts in the book that came as revelations to me in this latest book, Past Tense. One is that when you're looking through old, ancient manuscripts, white cotton gloves do more harm than good. True or false?
That is true, yeah. There's been a long-standing kind of image for movies and television that you put on the white gloves when you have a rare old book. And it is... It's not what happens, and
how could they do more harm than good?
Because what happens is that if you don't use your gloves, then you've got the possibility of either oil or dirt from your fingers staining the pages somewhat. If you use the gloves, then your touch sensation is so diminished that you can actually tear the page as you try and turn it. And so overall, they want you to not wear the gloves.
Next fact. Inhaling tar fumes was thought to prevent tuberculosis.
Well, obviously that is not medically true, but it was a myth.
Was it?
Yeah, when I was a kid, and my mother was, a perfectly sensible woman in many ways, and, she wasn't nuts, but she believed, there was a community belief, there was a sort of cultural belief that tar, the road tar, would, if you inhaled it, it would protect your lungs from tuberculosis. And if we, back then when I was a kid, there were lots of medical things that we don't really see now. If you were a little boy and you had German measles, you were loaned out to all the little girls' houses so they would get German measles so they could get it over with before they reached puberty. That was very important medically. And I think that was probably a good idea. But also my mother, if she heard that, the street was being resurfaced 2 streets away or something, she would send us out there to go and walk behind the wagon and sniff the tar.
Is that right? I'd never heard that before.
Yeah.
And have you ever had tuberculosis?
I have never had tuberculosis.
QED, right? Works. QED.
There
now,
you go.
Idris Elba is being backed for the role of Jack Reacher on television, but I'm not sure whether in the American context, certainly you could accommodate the fact that he's not white.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I love Idris.
Who doesn't love Idris Elba?
He sent me a jacket, actually. He's a lovely guy. I met him at an awards event in London. Really nice guy. Really like him. I think,
Did he think you were badly clothed? Is that why he sent you a jacket?
I think, he started a clothing line, and I think he just wanted to celebrate and show me. It's a really nice jacket. In fact, I'll bring it to New Zealand.
Okay.
But you're right. I mean, seriously, as a serious intellectual point, I think, to be honest, black people in America have a set of circumstances in the background of their lives or the foundation of their lives that, I can't imagine. The the inheritance of first slavery and then Jim Crow and the prejudice and the being held down. I think it produces a kind of mental architecture that I can't obviously understand because I'm not black. And therefore I would think to make an authentic character would be very hard. I don't have a problem with one ethnicity writing about another ethnicity, or women writing about men, or men writing about women. It's not to do with that. It's just that to get the character convincing, you have to understand their internal stresses. And I think white people cannot understand black people's internal lives.
Francis astutely wants to know, we hear about Reacher's toothbrush, but not about his condoms. Does he have children all over the place?
Well, the head of my publishing company loves that idea, that there must be a little Reacher out there somewhere, and we got to find him and write about him. He must have. He must have. There must be half a dozen children. I mean, I could have.
Books?
Could have the same thing.
What?
Because years and years ago, I participated in a fertility thing. Where I went to college. There was a hospital next door, a women's hospital that had a fertility clinic, and they would pay the students to go and give a sample for artificial insemination. And I was broke as a student, and this was it was a long time ago, but it was £4. You got £4. You could that was your bar bill for the week probably. And so, there could be hundreds of me running around.
Good Lord. Do you ever think about that when you're walking down the street?
I kind of do, It would be fascinating to know what had happened. But on the other hand, then I would feel responsible. So probably I'd better not know.
How did you describe yourself? A poor person who happens to have got a lot of money. Somebody says, Matt, the digger. He says, that's funny, Lee. I'm a rich guy with hardly any money at all. Enough, however, he says, to never miss a Reacher book. Thank you very much.
Clearly a guy of charm and quality, and I thank you very much.
Now you and Margaret Atwood and a whole lot of other people are, Julian Barnes, auctioning your characters' names in order to make money, raise money for freedom from torture. How will that work? How does it happen?
Well, what happens is they get together. I guess it happens online a lot, actually. There's a lot of online auctions. I'm not sure whether this is online or an evening banquet or both. But what happens is, lot number 3, get your name in the next Jack Reacher book. That is on offer, and people bid on it. And whoever wins then has the right to have their name as a character alongside Reacher, or a name that they choose. Very often what happens is the winner will nominate his wife or their kid or something like that. One time I did it and somebody nominated their dog. It was for an animal charity, so I guess that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But, the torture thing is, there is a lot of horrific stuff in the world, but one of the worst things I imagine is if you are a survivor of torture, your life is ruined in ways that are very fundamental and very deep. You're left afraid and insecure, as well as in physical agony a lot of the time. And so those people need all the help and support and nurturing and care that we can give them. So I'm really, really happy to participate in that.
And so what you're offering is putting someone's name to a character in your next book.
Yeah, and I've done it before, and there's a character that recurs in several of my books, Frances Nagley. She's a good friend of Reacher, used to be his sergeant there, about as close as Reacher is with anybody, and she was a charity winner. Frances Nagley is a nurse in San Francisco, and she bid in one of those charities, got her name in the book.
Nice.
And that's happened quite a lot. I think it's a great way because, what else can authors do to help, really?
So did you have that character and then you put Frances Nagley's name to her?
That happens if it comes late. If it comes late in the book, then, you just swap out the name. If it comes early enough, you build it in from the start. And This time it's going to be very slightly late because I think the auction is this month sometime, and I'm already well into next year's book. So it'll either be a late occurring character or I'll go back and change a name. Yeah.
So you always start on the September the 1st?
I do. That's the sentimental anniversary of when I started the very first book all those years ago.
Right. So you've got a month into the book.
Yeah.
And it's called Blue Moon.
Yeah.
You know that.
I know the title and I know what's happened so far, but what is going to happen next, I've got no clue.
Wow. But I think that we can all agree that Jack Reacher is going to emerge as strong and relatively inscrutable as ever.
I think he's going to win, and I think, he's going to just shrug it off and head for the bus depot, and he'll be somewhere else tomorrow.
Given the size of him, it made me laugh, actually. There's one bit in past tense where he's hiding behind a tree.
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny.
It's not quite big enough, yeah.
Very good to talk to you. Look forward to seeing you in New Zealand in Idris Elba's jacket, preferably.
Yeah, I can't wait to get there. And I'll show you the jacket and you can see what you think.
Thank you. Lee Child talking to us on the line from New York.